I rang the buzzer. Oh, here we are. Good. Green light. Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025, 7:31 a.m. in the morning, and this is the meeting of the Edina Housing Redevelopment Authority. And I'm going to ask, who's calling roll? Executive Director Scott Neal is going to call the roll.
Commissioner Risser.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce. Here. Chair Hovland.
Here. Just a reminder to folks that we're doing these meetings, whether it's city council meetings or HRA meetings, in a hybrid sort of fashion. Some folks may be tuning in on television or watching on their computers, watching remotely in some form or fashion. There's only one place in the meeting this morning where you can participate if you're a community member, and that is during community comment, and you can call in. No one in the audience this morning other than staff. So if anyone wants to call in and address the HRA on a matter that's not on the agenda this morning or scheduled for a future public hearing before the HRA, you're welcome to do so. And having provided that information, we will now do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that recognition this morning. And then we've got a meeting agenda that we need to approve or modify. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda in any form or fashion? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as published?
So moved. Second.
We got a motion by Commissioner Pierce, second by Commissioner Jackson to adopt the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Now we're at community comment, and there, as I mentioned, there's no one in the audience but staff. I don't know if we have anybody online or not.
I don't have anyone on the line, but because there is a brief delay in the broadcast, I would recommend that we put that number back up on the screen and we wait a minute or so to make sure people have that opportunity to call in. My clock shows it at 7:34. I will come back to you at 7:35 or when I have a caller, whichever's first.
Very good.
It is now 7:35 and I still don't have a caller, so I think it's safe to move forward with the agenda.
Very good. Thank you for that. Our practice is that we have the executive director respond to any community comments from the prior meeting, and I'll turn to Executive Director Neal to see if he has any responses.
There are no community comments to respond to from the previous meeting.
All right, very good. Next is the consent agenda for fairly straightforward beginning of the year sort of items on the consent agenda. Is there anyone that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda?
I do.
All right, which one?
The minutes from December 19th.
6.4. Oh, December 19th, okay. All right. So with the exception of the minutes of December 19, 2024 for the HRA, is there a motion to adopt the other items on the agenda, on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Pierce moves, Commissioner Jackson seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda with the exception of the item that is part of 6.4, which is the minutes of the December 19, 2024 HRA meeting. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed, carried. And then let's turn to those minutes on December 19, 2024, and go to Commissioner Risser and see what,
My concern comes from page 3, and it's the line, the board requested allowing for community space for the city council to have office hours at the lab. And two things. One, I know last year we did have a dialogue about changing the way we did minutes so that they would be more in line with the way Minnetonka does. We have not followed through with that, and in minutes for both the HRA as well as city council, we are a block, this sort of generic, the board, and I think, and what that means is that one person can make a suggestion and suddenly it looks like we're all behind it. And I do have concerns about city council members officing out of the lab. Specifically, it is a B Corp. Also, that space is in a private office building. And I don't know if we are going to be paying rent to do that. So there's, that could be a problem. But if we're not paying rent, that could also be a problem because my understanding, and I thought we were going to have documentation about the loan renegotiation, but it just seems like that is not necessarily a great idea. We could also office out of spaces that are public spaces. I know it would be a little bit cumbersome, but I personally do not want to be officing out of 7201 Metro Boulevard.
Commissioner Jackson.
So if I meet with somebody at Jerry's, which is a private business, do you disapprove of that?
I do not. This is a different kettle of fish because this is making it official that this is our official space for city council members to office out of. And I know I will hear from constituents who will want to meet at Jerry's, and I will go and I will meet there or another location. Sometimes people want to meet at a park. And so it's more at the discretion of an individual resident, and I am comfortable with that. But for us to have official offices out of 7201 Metro Boulevard, that's not something I want to do. If other council people want to do that, I don't think there's anything, I don't know if that's a problem or not.
So I just learned that we actually have an office here, which I didn't know at the time I made that comment. So that actually solves the problem for me. I don't have any problem meeting with somebody in my home or going to another place that is not a restaurant. I think if the member of the public is not comfortable meeting in a private business, that's perfectly fine. We can meet in a public way, but I don't think that we should designate one way or another as off limits. And I don't think this was making it official either.
Well, the way I read this is that their board, not our board, not the Housing Redevelopment Authority, their board asked questions or suggested that to us to think about allowing community space for city council's use. So it's just like they were reporting on what their board said. It doesn't, no?
I'm not sure. Okay, I think if you go back and you look at the video, it's a little bit different than that, but I think that's not the main point. I think the point is it a good idea for us to office out of that locale? And for me, I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, Manager Neal.
I think some of the issues with the word to office, as a verb. I think we understood that as a place where you might come in and sort of sit down for a couple of hours, and you might meet with people, you might not. It depends who wants to show up, but it wouldn't be an official office. It'd be a place where you could meet people for official business if you wanted to.
That's my recollection from the presentation too, was that if someone didn't have a place they could meet with a resident or someone else that wanted a place to have a quick meeting, they could certainly contact the board or the lab and go up to that space. Member Risser.
Just a question about, and I know in that conversation it also came up that we are using this for city meetings, and I'm wondering, do we pay when we do that, or is that a freebie that we get?
It is comped, right? We don't pay a fee for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we're debating this. I don't understand the purpose of debating it. To me, it's no different than going to Jerry's or me sending out a note saying, hey, I'm going to do office hours at Jerry's every other Wednesday. And I'm going to grab a table, sit back in the corner. If people come, they come. If they don't, Jerry's gets a cup of coffee off of me. I didn't interpret this any different than that. And then I also didn't think of it as, when we toss around the term official business, I don't know that I would sign HRA papers as the secretary at Jerry's. To me, that feels like official business I should be doing here. It would just be to meet with community members. And so that's how I interpret it. I wasn't here for this particular meeting, but I did meet with them when they mentioned, hey, it would be nice to start to use this space for more community events. And if I remember, they even talked about maybe it's a space that the city could use if they want to have team meetings or whatever as well. I thought it was a great idea. It's a wonderful space. And so I thought, well, yeah, even if we said no, quote unquote, there's actually nothing that stops me from still doing it, right?
Right.
So.
But is there something about the context of the sentence structure there that bothers you that you wanted to change because it didn't accurately reflect what they had been proposing? Because what you're talking about is more substantive. I can see where that might have keyed a thought in your mind about having a discussion about it, but is there anything about the structure of the minutes themselves that's you find
Yeah.
inaccurate?
That monolithic, the board. Well, okay, so here it's saying the board and implying the chamber, but in general, okay, with that particular sentence, no, I am okay with that. But I
Okay.
do,
But if you use that as a method to raise this issue, I think that's fine.
I agree with that, because this isn't a decision to do something.
well, we are referred to actually throughout the minutes, we are the board. And I do wish we could do what Minnetonka does so that when there's more information in the minutes so that we know who is saying what. And I don't think we're ever I'm gonna write my memoir. It will be council asked questions and made comments. But it'd be nice if there was a way to handle the content that comes out of the discussion from the dais in a way that is a little more specific. We can move on, that is all, except I was wondering, I thought we were gonna be getting more of a substantive request from the chamber today. Maybe.
No,
Okay.
that's something that we're still
Okay.
discussing with them.
All right, thank you.
But I think you did raise an interesting question. I don't remember us asking them if we could have office hours. Did you, Carolyn? Okay. Okay. All right, okay, so the minutes are accurate. All right, so someone care to move those, adoption of those minutes of December 19, 2024?
So moved.
Second.
All right, got a motion by Commissioner Rister, second by Commissioner Jackson to adopt the minutes of December 19, 2024 as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Those minutes are approved for the December 19, 2024 HRA meeting. All right, now let's move on to kind of the heart of the meeting this morning. That's reports and recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, this is the beginning of the year. It's a time of the year when we're doing things like appointing the executive director, which we did in the consent agenda, designating an official newspaper, repositories for funds of the HRA. And now we've got to propose a slate of officers, and Executive Director Neal, it looks like you've got a proposal here that would involve the same slate we had last year.
That is our custom, Mr. Chair and members of the commission, to appoint the slate if the slate is fully returning. This year's slate the current officers are Mayor Hovland as chair, Commissioner Jackson as vice chair, and Commissioner Pierce as secretary.
Anybody have any thoughts on that or care to make a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Pierce seconds the adoption of the recommendation of the executive director to approve the election of officers, with the slate being the mayor as chair, the Commissioner Jackson as vice chair, and Commissioner Pierce as secretary. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. That motion is approved. And then we will go on to some updates, again, involving activities from 2024 and other things that are ongoing in nature. First matter before us, our Bill Neundorf, our Economic Development Manager, has this matter, which is a report out for us, an update on the 5146 Eden Avenue. Welcome.
Yes, good morning. This first item is for discussion only, but we wanted to further the conversation about the city's old public works site that's been vacant for a long time, especially in light of the recent conversations about the city budget. This is a piece of property that has a value. It's in a desirable location. As we all know, we've looked at a number of different creative proposals over the years, but so far nothing has been built. Staff would recommend that we get this property back on the marketplace, find new developers, and or single developer, however that might work out, and move it forward to bring in the revenue and actually monetize this asset and return it to productive use. We've had a lot of conversations over the years about the site. It is zoned industrial, although it's guided for more of a mixed use. So there is a lot of zoning work that's involved. And so when we issue, when we put it out on the market, we're recommending a request for proposal or RFP process. It's best to get a prompt sale and a firm sale and a good sales price if we can provide clear direction of what we want. And so that's the purpose of the discussion this morning, is to get your input so that as we put together an RFP and get it on the marketplace, we can give the developer the best direction that we can. I've got a series of questions that I'll walk through for discussion, and happy to answer questions along the way, or at the end. It might be actually more structured towards the end. But just as a refresher, last May, we looked at several different sketches of how the site might be laid out. We looked at townhome combinations, condos, co-ops. We included the restaurant in the park. So I just wanted to put this up as kind of where we left off last May. One of my first questions is this still the direction we want to go? We also had discussions about coming up with a creative idea, creative alternative. One of the discussion points, though, is with creativity comes greater challenge, comes greater delays, and we think it's in our best interest to move this forward. So with that in mind, I'll start getting to the questions, and then happy to have the conversation at the end. So speed versus price. If it were utterly important, if we were in a dire situation, we could put a for sale sign out there today and sell it to the highest bidder that comes in. It would be a low price because it's not zoned for anything that works. Alternatively, we can go with a more traditional sales process, issue an RFP, and actually get a combination of price and product that we're very aligned with and satisfied with. But just to remind you, if getting money in the door as quickly as possible is the preference, that can also happen. We've also had conversations about the cost of the city's policies and some of our policy goals. Over the years, we've developed the 7 guiding principles for this Grandview district. We've adopted and updated our affordability policy, our sustainability policies, all good forward-thinking policies, but they add cost to the site. So one of the other triggers that we might have is if we want to continue to enforce those, we should be clear about that. If we want to make it a little bit easier to develop that site, we could talk about waivers or relaxations of those policies. Again, don't have a firm recommendation one way or the other, but just to let you know that there are options out there for us. It's also a challenge to have confidence that the sale actually gets closed. I think we are all disappointed, including the developer, when the senior co-op project wasn't able to move forward. And we've found ourselves in that situation on a handful of occasions. Pick a developer, seems like a really creative idea, a good idea. We put the numbers together, spend a lot of time and typically other people's money, but then don't execute the sale, don't get anything built. So as we consider moving this project forward, the best way to get the sale to close is to be as clear as possible up front what our expectations are, try to root those in reality so that a developer can actually achieve that and then get it moving. Over the years, we've had a lot of conversations about being more creative and doing this and including this and partnerships, and it's all well-intended, but if we want to sell this and get it developed, I'm just urging that we consider being clear and concise. Regarding the uses on the property, all the zoning decisions you'll consider as a city council, will get planning commission input. But when we left off last year, you indicated a very high preference for sale housing, townhome, missing middle type. We talked about price point. We did talk to developers last summer. We didn't do a broad, we didn't put it out there, but we just tested the market, and that's a challenge. If we will only accept a for-sale product, condos, co-ops, or townhomes, we should be prepared that there might be a delay in getting it actually financed and built, or we should be prepared that the price will be lower for the land. And so one of the key questions that I would ask you is, do we want to stick with a mandate that it be ownership? Or is it okay to say we strongly prefer ownership, but would accept or at least entertain offers for either a combination of ownership and rental? When we left off last summer, the consensus seemed to be any proposal that came in as all rental would just be that would not be considered. Just wanted to test the waters and see where we are in 2025, because that to me is the biggest question about this site, is that how deeply are we in the ownership, or are we open to combinations? I actually did these slides in the reverse order. The other piece of it, ownership versus rental, last summer we also talked about residential, a restaurant, and a public park. We've talked about that for several years. I still think that's a good combination, but there's been concern, especially in light of the budget conversations, about the ongoing costs of a new public park. In other projects, we've designed those green spaces as public plazas where they're owned and maintained by the developer, but then the city, the general public, has the right to use it. We might want to reconsider the demand for a public park and soften that to include a plaza or something like that doesn't put a future cost burden on the community. And then also the provision of a restaurant, we wanted to activate the green space, still a great idea. Some developers are interested, the restaurateur is still interested in doing something there, but other developers are interested in doing things that aren't restaurants. And so just wanted to gauge your interest in how firm we should stick to that formula.
When you say other developers are interested in other ideas, we haven't heard any of those. You've been recipient of some of those calls, I suppose, that are inquiries about potential uses. What are some of those potential uses you're hearing about?
Residential is the main interest.
And rental? Market rate rental, is that what you're talking?
The unsolicited calls are rental apartments. The targeted calls that we've been doing are more townhome missing middle, trying to find developers interested in that. We've also talked about complexity of the site, doing public-private partnerships. That's what we were trying to do with Jester Concepts and that park and the restaurant. Quite honestly, we never found a way to actually make it work. We never reached the point where we had to figure it out, but we spent a lot of hours trying to figure out how the park can be a park sometimes, but also an amenity for the restaurant, how we can share costs, even the conversations about sharing outdoor toilet facilities for park patrons was much more complex than either party expected. And so one of the questions for us to consider is, if we have higher expectations about complexity and creativity, that's going to make a greater challenge for the project. And so would we want to be open to a more simple, straightforward project and get certainty and get it closed and get it sold? Also, along the way, we've discussed in this forum and others just the challenges of our zoning code and the process of going through when you've got to rezone a site, and then for this site, I mean, the only realistic way to get something built there is to go through the PUD process. There's been a lot of consternation and conversation about that. That's still staff's recommendation, to actually have this site be developed in alignment with the comprehensive plan. But one of the challenges that we're expecting is a lot of the details, right? So as we put a proposal forward, they're going to go through the process, through the planning commission, through the city council, all of our typical process. There might be some trade-offs. Maybe we want a 30-foot setback, and maybe the way that it lays out, we only get a 24-foot setback, just a random example. We need to have a thought in mind. Do we want to, how can we write this proposal or this request for proposals so that we can give the developer some idea of what is acceptable to us? We've also had conversations in the past about financing, public financing versus private financing. At this point, we're presuming that the site is privately financed. When we were talking with Jester Concepts more intensely, there was conversation about possibly using Spark for that project, because the numbers it was right on the cusp of those numbers working. The site isn't a TIF district, but we don't expect TIF to be used for this site. We do expect grants might be pursued depending on the developer and the proposal. But just to put it out there, whether or not there's any interest in again, sending a clear message, are we interested in any public financing, or are we expecting it all to be private? And then one of the biggest questions is, when we do get to the point where we've got it under contract, we've agreed on the sales price and the terms, and they're working through the zoning, where does that sales revenue go? Today, the property is owned by the HRA. So the sales revenue would be collected by the HRA to be used for HRA purposes, housing, redevelopment, those types of things, land acquisition, a number of different things the HRA could do. An alternative, in light of our budget conversations, working with the executive director on this over the last several weeks, theoretically, we could return or transfer the property back to the city, and when the land is sold, that revenue goes back into the city fund to be used for things that the HRA doesn't control: firefighters, police, parks, plus roads and sewers and everything else. If we do transfer it back to the city, there's trade-offs, right? There's always consequences. The reason we have it owned by the HRA is that it's a less complex sales process when it's with the HRA. And in general, when the HRA sells property, the aim is to sell it for a reasonable price for the best project. Under state law, when the city sells property, the main goal is to sell it for the highest price, which might mean that it's not the perfect project that we were all hoping for. So there's a trade-off there, but yet, since the site has to be rezoned, the site plan has to be approved for it, the city council is not giving up all controls, but it does make a dramatic difference in how those sales revenues can be used. So I think that's a really important question, that it doesn't really affect the buyer, but it would affect us. And then the last topic of conversation is how to actually get this deal closed. We want to make sure that we're transparent in this process. The sale of real estate typically involves a series of public meetings and public discussions. It also includes some closed meetings to actually discuss those sales contracts and discuss how we can get the best outcome for the community. And so just to remind folks that using the traditional process, we can expect some public meetings like this. We can also expect a couple closed executive sessions for discussion, and then come back after those closed meetings, either the same day or at the next meeting, and have the conclusion and any action occurring in the public meeting. But just wanted to remind folks that there is that combination of open meetings and closed meetings for real estate. And in order to get this project to move forward, we should expect to talk about this at a handful of meetings over the next 3 to 6 months. So with that, just also the last offer for any other final concerns or suggestions. Our goal as staff is to deliver a clear message to potential buyers about what we want and what they have to propose to us to satisfy us and actually get that project developed and to get it sold. And so that's the kind of input I'm looking for, is suggestions. If there's any hot topics or hot issues that you think are must-have versus other things that you're more lenient on, we're listening, and what we intend to do is get your feedback today and continue to move forward with the RFP. We'd love to get that published in February, because this all still takes time. If we get it under contract this spring, we can aim to close it, to sell it next year. So it takes time. So we're hoping to get the conversation rolling. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you for conversation and any questions as well.
You know what might help, Lisa, would me, if you roll back to your slide 3, which is where we ended up last year, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the exploration you made in the market with respect to this idea that we had, because we don't really know what kind of response you got.
Yeah. So I reached out, Stephanie and I reached out to a couple townhome developers. There's interest. There's strong interest in the luxury sector. They think that would work well. For townhomes at a lower price point, you're looking at a lower land value, but also a more limited pool of developers. And with the condominium and co-op or rental building, of course, there's interest in the rental. There is interest in senior co-ops by other developers. We had worked with United Properties, and they were working on something where they were very nice units, very large units at a high sales price. And what they found is that just wasn't meeting where the market was back then. There is interest in something of a co-op that is more modest in scale. The units are not 1,600 feet. It's more of a traditional co-op size unit. I've not heard from anyone interested in building a condominium, but we also haven't looked a whole lot. And with the restaurant partner, Jester is still interested in doing something here. We still have a contract with them. I don't want to overlook that. But right now the contract is unenforceable. The dates are long lapsed. It needs to be revised. But they still have interest in being on the site, whether it's in the location that we first anticipated, closer to the northern edge of the site or northern portion. They'd also be interested in pulling it down to the southern portion. So they're open. They just like this neighborhood. They like the location. They're willing to work with us and with any other prospective partner. But we've only done focus groups. We haven't tested it thoroughly. That's what the RFP would do.
Mr. Chair, could I add just a bit to the staff presentation here? I gave the order actually to demolish the building that was on this site in 2011. And since that time, we have gone through many different cycles of how we wanted to manage the ultimate redevelopment of this site. And we've tried to be as creative as possible, but I think our record on this site has shown that it just hasn't worked. When you think about what the school district did with its land for the former bus barn, on the other side of the railroad tracks. They made a pretty quick decision. They sold their land for $4 million, which is was about half the size, maybe a little less than half the size of our site, and it redeveloped and they cashed out. They monetized it. Given our discussions around budget and kind of the medium term that we're looking at, the sale of this property could provide enough economic value that we would translate that into our capital spending, right? We would take whatever proceeds are generated by this, put it into our capital spending. That would allow us to reduce our capital levy. So there would be a positive impact on that for everyone as well. But we have to make that decision. So that would be my recommendation. We don't have to own a parcel of land to have a lot of say in how it's redeveloped. We all know that. But this is how that could benefit our ongoing discussion around the budget.
Commissioner?
Super high level. In terms of process, and you mentioned it would likely go to a PUD, and I've been thinking about PUDs a lot. And we tend to create these proprietary PUDs where the actual zoning commits to a specific developer's site plan. And I really would encourage us not to go down that path, especially because as things happen, and we've seen this with, the 7200 site, the only thing that can go up there is what is the exclusive right of the person who has that site plan. And so we are zoning in such a way that is so bespoke and so limited. And then when things happen and they don't necessarily move forward for whatever reason, we're locked into that. And I think it makes us really cut off potential market forces, and it pulls things away from, it pulls away opportunities from other developers, and then you get TIF, and TIF was raised as a possibility. And so if we're doing another proprietary PUD and then granting TIF money to that, so essentially public funds that can only be accessed by the entity that owns those specific site plans that have been formally embedded in our zoning code, I think that's a problem. So I would really like it if we can avoid going down that path and make it, you do the PUD somehow so that it's not wedded to an individual entity's site plan. Thank you.
So typically in the process, you'd have a buyer come with a LOI, and then you'd start that whole regulatory process. So the fact that you end up with a site-specific PUD comes after the agreement to purchase, really. So I don't have that same kind of fear that we couldn't, use the same PUD or modify a PUD if the deal we had was some specific developer cratered out. But usually that doesn't occur until downstream, after you've got a purchase agreement in place.
We can certainly look into the PUD process and see what options are out there. I don't know if that's possible to do it as was described, but you're right, Mr. Chair. The intention is to go and get offers, solicit offers, and see what's out there, see what makes sense, pick one, and then have them go through that whole process, through that whole zoning conversation. So the selection of the developer and the general concept would come first, the site plan second, then closing the real estate third, and then building it.
Commissioner?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just describe, because I think I'm confused. That's funny for me to, when I hear myself say that, I think I'm confused. What's different about what you're describing now versus what we did the first few years when projects came forward?
It's similar. The overall process is similar. We initially We did the first we called it an RFI back then. That was 2014. We did a competitive process. We did something very similar to this, a little bit more pomp and circumstance. We brought 6 or 7 different developers, and they did presentations. And so it's a little bit similar to that, but trying to shorten the timeline.
Okay.
Developers don't like RFPs because the way most of them are structured, and I'm not recommending we do this, most of them are structured where the developer has to put a lot of money into their proposal. Let's say 10 people apply, we're going to pick 1. That means right from the get-go, 9 of them are going to spend a whole lot of money and just waste it. And that usually dissuades most developers from even applying. So I'm recommending a more simplified process, but overall, it's similar to what we've done in the past, just tighter.
Okay.
To achieve our goals in a shorter time frame.
Okay, so I asked that question because the way I was interpreting your presentation is that you were asking us to be clear on the criteria for the projects that we want to see on that site. And then I liked your scale because that immediately put me into the mindset that you're asking us to think about how we weigh certain opinions that we've expressed before. And so a great one would be market rate versus affordable housing. We've said we don't want market rate there. Well, if there's a deal and we've decided we're going to sell, then essentially then you're into the process where a developer comes in, they've done an LOI, they go through the sketch plan review just like any other project, right? And so that's what I thought you were asking for us to say, all right, what are you comfortable with this criteria as we go to market? Is that fair?
That's fair. What I hope to do is get a general conversation and general direction today, and then come back to you with that RFP, and I'll confirm, is this what, are you agreeable to this particular set of parameters?
Yeah, okay. So I like the idea of us trying to, I don't like the way it sounds, but to relax what our requirements are to get potential projects in there to get this done. I think it's a valuable piece of property. I would want us to, one, make sure there aren't any city needs for pieces of that property. And so thinking about that, well, would probably be something I want to make sure we do. And then I suppose I would still want to try to address missing middle. However, if you said to me, if we sold this and it becomes condos at market rate and it's going to generate, I don't know, $6 million, it's coming into the HRA, and then we can take that money to then go do townhome someplace for missing middle, I'd be okay with that. So in general, I like what you're proposing. I want to say I don't know that anything is off limits to me. I'd want to see what those ideas are, but I would want to make sure we don't end up in a situation where a developer is spending, $2 million on some concept, and then at the 9th hour, it gets disapproved. So if there are things in there that we could modify to give some assurance that, right, there is possibility that these things will go through, then those criteria I might adjust. But in general, I like the idea of what you're proposing.
Great. Can I ask for one clarification? When you use the term missing middle, do you mean missing middle pricing or missing middle scale? Like size of buildings?
Yeah.
Townhomes and like a 3 or 4 story building?
So that's fair.
Or is it price?
Normally when I say that, I am talking about price. So and to be specific, I'm looking at the median home value and thinking of anything less than the median, which I guess isn't necessarily missing middle, but it does speak to housing affordability more broadly. And then because you asked, in terms of size, I do think about in our market, there are some missing housing sizes or configurations. So that would be the smaller townhomes, which speaks to size, right? So I'd probably say both of those things. But I do think about housing affordability more broadly, as I stated. Thank you.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to invert the way of doing this and to start with comments and then go to questions. So when this came before the Planning Commission in the present iteration that we'd been talking about, they were very disappointed that this was not an exciting idea. And so I always keep that in the back of my mind, that they were very disappointed it wasn't something special. And in particular, one of the things is that we've got that big drop-off because the slope of the area changes. And so one of the criteria I would like to add is if you can use that drop-off for parking or something, I would include that, because I think to bring in all that dirt, fill it in, is expensive. It's an unnecessary expense. So that would be one criteria I would add to what we've talked about before. But I think we need to talk a little bit about, making sure that the Planning Commission understands we need to do something. So I hear their message that they wanted something exciting, and of course the Planning Commission has changed since then. But the most important part of the comment that I took from what they said was that we've got that cut in the land already. Can we please use that for something? So that's the criteria based on their feedback I would add. Commissioner Pierce talked about city needs for this property. I would like to see the analysis done that shows that this is not a good spot for the fire station. Intuitively, I understand that, but I would like to see, a traffic design or something that shows why it's so difficult for emergency vehicles to get over there and get up to Morningside, which is the neighborhood that most needs additional coverage by fire. We hear a lot of chatter about why not use this spot for the fire station. I'd like to have a presentation on why that's not possible. Absolutely, I want to keep the environmental and housing policies in place. This is a city piece of land, and we should be forward with our policies, not retreating from it. Let's see. If we sell this property, I'd like the proceeds to go to purchase the land south of the fire station number 2 that we're building. So that becomes HRA property. We could use that money to pay down the bonds. Maybe it's not 1-for-1, but if we can, I think that would be good. And then we have that piece of land as an HRA property that we can talk about housing. I'm good with the idea of modest co-ops and luxury townhomes. I think that would be really cool. And that goes then to my question. Can we possibly zone this ahead of sale? Zone it mixed use and then sell it as that so that it's not industrial and we don't, and kind of, make that decision ahead of time to lower the cost for the developer.
So I'll let, conferring with Carrie Teague, our Community Development Director, well, you can answer.
I know.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We could rezone that proactively. The surrounding zoning is PCD2, similar to Jerry's, but we certainly could do that.
Yeah, I think if we can zone it PCD2, if that's, sort of the thing ahead of time, that would lower the cost and the uncertainty for any potential developer and have them come forward. I'd like to have a condition that pedestrian bridge be attached to some open space, some green space, whatever that looks like, so that we can have that feeling of being able to transverse the area by foot. But
if I could just add, in proactively rezoning to PCD2, you do lose some of your abilities to determine what happens there. If we rezone it to PCD2, sell the site, they're entitled to a development that meets those PCD2 regulations. So the sustainability policy, affordable housing policy, those things would be tough to require.
In the absence of a PUD, you mean?
Right.
Correct.
Because we can negotiate them into a PUD, but we can't require it by right.
Okay, well, that's a circle I'd
Good
like
question.
to square.
Good question.
Because if we can cut down the uncertainty for a developer and get this thing developed and get some cash in our account, that would be good. Obviously, anyways, we can choose who we sell it to, but let's put that on the table as something, and maybe people coming forward who are willing to buy it will set aside funds for our policies. But so long as it's in our control, I want our policies to be in place, but I also want to sell this. I want to get the cash. I want to put the land money into land money, if at all possible, at least to pay down those bonds if that's if that's financially feasible for that fire station number 2. I don't.
Could we ask Scott Neal? I don't think we have to worry about buying land from
No,
the city.
we don't have to do that. There's some actions you have to take to convert land ownership from HRA to city and vice versa, but it doesn't have to be
Have to be a cash
as
transaction.
complicated.
However, I'm personally averse to debt. If we can take cash from the sale of land and reduce city debt, that would be my top priority of the use of that money, so that we can reduce the debt on that fire station number 2 and hold that land more free and clear.
That's a different question.
Different
Yeah.
question, and that's more complicated than it sounds because the way the debt is structured, it may not be callable for a number of years. But you get the net benefit of it if you use it for capital spending too, because you get to reduce the capital levy by a like amount.
I understand, but borrowed money is more expensive than money spent that's in your pocket. So if we can reduce the interest money that we're paying on other capital things, that would be, so that we can open up anyways. That's just my preference, is if we can use it to pay down existing debt on land that we own, that would be my preference. Second would be going into the construction fund, because I know they're both our needs. But if we're going to have to bond to fix parks, that's kind of the discussion I'm thinking about. So where are we bonding where we can get rid of that debt? So that maybe that's a broader discussion than that specific piece of land. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought too. The way to navigate that would probably be if there was something else we had to bond for, we could bond for less because we had cash sitting there from the sale of this land.
Right.
Or sometimes we might be at the tail end of a debt service commitment and those bonds are callable at the tail end normally. So we could take a look at that too. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying we need to look into that a little bit more because there's some public finance issues on the side too.
Remember, Commissioner Risser.
I have really some strong concerns about the reality that our affordable housing requirements are so burdensome that we cannot rezone to PCD2, that we have to go to PUD. And I think we really need to look at our affordable housing policy, because this is not a situation that is sustainable at all. We can't just keep going along this path. I do think you're looking for some specifics, and I really don't have a strong desire to see a park that will have to be maintained and all of that and cost the city on this site. I think the idea of a public plaza is perfectly fine, and so I would certainly offer that up as something I will not cause issues on. Okay. I think we've had it for a really, really long time. I remember when a medical facility wanted to go up, and I supported that when I was on the planning commission. It was long ago, before Manager Neal was here. So it's been a long time, and we do need to advance. And so I think we are going to have to be flexible. It's got to be pragmatic. So you can hold me to that. Great.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you remember, Executive Director Neal, I'm thinking about you raised an interesting issue with where the Avador is now, which was the old school bus garage site. I'm trying to recall the process they went through. If they did an RFP or they just put it on the market? Because
They did what I would call more of a selective RFP process. Is that how you remember it, Bill?
Yeah,
I mean, they invited maybe 3 or 4 developers to take a look at it, and
Yeah, but they didn't have an RFP that defined use.
they did not want to go through any of the trouble of acting like a developer owner, right?
Yeah.
They said, we own this property, we want to monetize it and get out of it, and the faster we can do that, the better.
Yeah, and then the people that represented the school district, I think it was Bob Strakota, came to us and said, here's where the way the school board's going to get their best price, and that is if we think about 55 plus housing.
Yeah.
This is our best, and so after we went through the regulatory process, that's what we approved. So when you think about this site and trying to maintain, to me, there's a correlation between flexibility on potential use and price. Because we don't know remember Risser just raised an interesting notion, and that is that, from time to time you hear Edina family physicians and Edina now are back talking to each other, and they need more space. Well, that could command a higher price than multifamily. So it's really hard for me to figure out how to approach selling this, especially when we sit in 2 capacities. If we were just the economic development arm and we said, okay, sell this property for the best possible price you can get, and then the city council has to decide whether or not they're going to permit that land use, that's a cleaner way in a way, but we have to wear both hats. So it's a little bit more awkward, not impossible, but a little bit more awkward. I thought Member Pierce raised an interesting, or Commissioner Pierce, is there a city use that we should be thinking about first? We all want to work on this budget and get this budget to be more predictable and sustainable over time. Property may have a role in that. I'm open-minded there too, especially when you think about, is there some other potential city use for it? But the range of value I remember is we had anywhere from $3 to $11 million as a potential price for it.
That's correct. Yeah, that was the last time we looked into it. That would have been around 2014 or 2015.
It was a long time ago.
16.
There were a couple proposals that had high density, which was the 11,
Yeah.
more on the 11 million side.
That may have been the high rise.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you pre-zone it, and we just zone it like what's around there, then what does that do with respect to somebody that comes and wants some height there? Does that preclude that? And that's our best price, but we already zoned
They
it.
could always seek variances, things like that, or even a rezoning.
What are the pros and cons of zoning it in advance, in your opinion?
I think it would be my opinion to not pre-rezone. It gives you more leverage. I think of the RFP that we did at 50th and France, where developers came in and pitched their ideas, and then the zoning came second. So just my initial thought on that.
It's a good comparative. We came in with an idea on what we wanted to have done down there, and Nolan Maines came in with a completely different idea that knocked it out of the park. Created much more value than we thought we'd ever see.
I tell you, my biggest concern is, and this is why I was asking the question, what's different? It would be so easy for us to fall right back into the same process where we're all asking for things and adding to the project. We kind of just kind of just did it, saying, well, we want the pedestrian bridge. And I don't disagree with that, to have access to the green space. I'm disappointed that we don't have what we thought we were going to get, right? That would have been really cool. But if we want to sell, I definitely agree with whatever policies we have, right? We need to honor those unless there's some legitimate variance that we want to give. But we shouldn't retract on those. But if we aren't, and I'll just use the word kind of disciplined in this is the outcome that we're going for, then we could very easily end up adding little things to it and then still end up with nothing there. And so that's where I was going with criteria. Are there, sacred things that we want to make sure we honor? I think there are some of those things. And then I think to a certain extent, there are going to have to be things where we may say, okay, we'll forego a particular amenity to get the $9 million to then go do something really great for the community. That's like a different philosophy to me. Well, maybe not different, but a philosophy I think we will have to practice with this particular project.
Well, what I kind of hear you saying is, we don't know what the market will deliver, and if we want to see what the best pricing would be, we got to maintain as much flexibility as
As
possible.
much flexibility, yeah, agreed.
Otherwise, we won't know what the best price is
Yeah.
for something. Could be medical office, could be a high-rise, a mid-rise, or, we just don't know. So that doesn't really help you much, does it?
No, it is helpful. So we'll get something together for the, probably the next meeting. We'll have a draft out there for you. I hope it'll be a final draft and we can get it moving. But I think there is interest in the marketplace. I think this year, everyone's got a different opinion about what development is going to be like in this year. But yet for this project, they won't be able to break ground this fall, right? We've got to close it, we've got to design it, get it entitled, they have to hire an architect to get it really designed. So, we're looking at construction in 2026 anyway. So, developers are smart. They know how to forecast. So we can cast a little bit wider net, but being clear about some things that are sacred to us, so to speak. So look forward to that at an upcoming meeting. And thanks for your ideas.
Commissioner?
I can't help wishing that Commissioner Agnew was here, because I know she has a lot of ideas. And so I don't know if it's possible to just reach out to her ahead of time.
For
That
sure.
would be great.
Yep.
We've got
Okay.
plenty of
Definitely
time
will
to
do
do
that.
that.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. All right, you got a few more things you want to accomplish this morning?
I do. Jumping on to our next item, this is our HRA year in review. And in your packet, there is a document, 20 or 30 pages. It summarizes the financial aspects of the HRA, as well as some of the projects, all of the projects that we've been working on. We've been doing this for several years. We update it annually in January. I spoke with Commissioner Jackson yesterday, and she identified a couple typos, so those are corrected in what's online, and we'll get it corrected, or that's what's on the screen. We'll get it corrected online as well. So thanks for bringing those to my attention. But I've got a brief presentation I'll show too. Okay, so year in review. Stephanie Hawkinson and I put this together each year, and just, big picture overview. But in 2024, similar to 2023, the pace and the number of these large-scale projects has been slowed from where it was a few years back. However, one noticeable thing is, chatting with our building department, there has been a lot of commercial remodeling this past year. So a lot of new businesses. At one point, I spoke with our health inspector. They were working on opening a dozen new restaurants that were mostly remodels from previous spaces. So there's been a lot of activity. On this map, it shows all the sites of the bigger construction projects. And if you compare this to maps from a couple years ago, it's slowed down. Still active, still very active. Redevelopment finance, that's what we're focused on as an HRA, and that's a conversation this morning. So in August, we had a really good presentation from Ehlers Associates. We asked them to dive into the impact of TIF on school districts, something we've talked about for many years, but we hired them to actually prepare the report, and we shared that with our colleagues at the schools, of course. So this map on the screen shows the 12 current TIF districts. It also shows, just for reference, the boundaries of the various school districts that are in Edina. So some of the TIF districts are in the Edina School District, some are in the Richfield School Districts. And these TIF districts vary from a length of 15 years to 26 years, depending on the laws that were applicable. Of course, we also have our Spark program that expires at the end of this year now, December 2025. And of course, the Housing Trust Fund and the affordable housing programs that continue to move forward. I mentioned we have a dozen TIF districts. In comparison, this graph is one that you've seen a few times before. This compares the city of Edina districts with our peers and neighbors in Hennepin County. So we're the green. About 1.6% of our tax base is within a TIF district. That puts us on the low end of the scale. And this is one matter where we'd like to be on the low end. The percentage varies year to year, depending on tax value and everything else. So the highest that I've ever seen Edina, at one point when Southdale 2 was active and things were really humming, about 5% of our tax base was in a TIF district. But we're currently at 1%. The big project that finished last year is right across the street from City Hall.
Bill, can you go back, please, to the previous slide? I just want to highlight, I hear frequently from people who are concerned that we're putting all the TIF districts in Richfield school districts. And I just wanted to point out to the public that it looks like there are only 2 of our TIF districts that are in the Richfield school district at this time, and that's 66 West and the newly created one at 7235 France. So I just wanted the public to note that we're not overburdening the Richfield school district here.
Correct, right. And when we create a TIF district, we're not targeting one school district or the other. It's just where that boundary lies. It's I'll say somewhat arbitrary boundary at this point that we have no control over.
Commissioner Risser.
This is a really good map, and if this is not on our website for TIF, it would be good to put that up there.
Yep. It will be after this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And to that point that Commissioner Jackson was raising, Executive Director Neal, you may want to comment on your past discussions with the superintendent in Richfield about their view on these TIF districts that get created within their school district.
Thank you, Chair. We have an operating protocol with the city of Richfield when we have something that's happening kind of in that area of Southdale that's between France and their corporate border. We share information about what we're looking at. I meet with the school superintendent, Richfield school superintendent, annually, usually in August, and we talk about the various projects, TIF districts that are in play. When there is a TIF district that's being contemplated, they get notification, just like Edina Schools or any other school district would. So we do have a good working relationship with Richfield Schools around not just tax increment, but around other operating, development, housing kind of issues too.
Thank you. And my recollection is that in the past they've been very supportive of the things that we're doing from a land use standpoint.
Very supportive. They understand their district, about 10% of their school district is inside the city of Edina, but that accounts for over 1/3 of their total tax base. So it's an important piece of land for them.
Commissioner?
I just realized in my role, I was out of bounds by saying this should be on the website. I should not be giving direction like that, but I really like the map. So.
It was our intention to do that, so we'll have it up there. I had mentioned that the big project that got finished this last year was the Mason Green Apartments and the restaurant there. So from a city council perspective, land use, the Mason Green is, it abided by the code. But for the HRA perspective, let's look at the dollars. So this chart, or this graph, shows the taxable market value of that property. So for the first, on the left side, I went back to 2020. It had a very low tax base when it was a mostly vacant Perkins restaurant. The restaurant was open, but the other 3/4 of the building was vacant since they had moved their headquarters years ago when they had to declare bankruptcy. So in 2023, the property sold. In 2024, it started to be built, and you see the chart starting to spike. And then in 2025, it's measured as being nearly complete, and that's when it really makes that tremendous surge upward. It will go it'll go upwards a little bit more next year when the tax assessor sees the full value of it. But that's why we use TIF, because we know that a property won't just get a coat of paint and a new tenant, it'll make a transformational change to our tax base. So in 2022, that property paid $99,000 in property taxes. In 2024, when the site was still considered by the assessor, it was considered a sold property and an incomplete building. The taxes that it paid doubled to over $200,000. In the years ahead, when it's assessed as a occupied building, a finished building, those dollars will skyrocket. The other thing to think about is the conversion from a commercial space that's subject to fiscal disparities to a mostly residential space that is not subject to fiscal disparities. So a reminder, the Minnesota fiscal disparity law says that 40% of the value of a commercial property is subtracted from the city's tax base and the schools and the counties, and it goes directly to the state fiscal disparity pool. So that's great for the pool and a lot of the outside communities, but it's not so great for us. So converting an older commercial space to a newer residential makes a big difference to our local tax base. I also started monitoring how those tax dollars are paid out. Where do they go? So looked at the last couple years. Again, this will change every year, but you'll start to see trends. So at the bottom I'll start from the bottom. The dark blue color is Hennepin County taxes. The orange color is the city of Edina. The green is Edina Public Schools. The bright blue is the state taxes and the fiscal disparities. And then, of course, there's always smaller districts, the Mosquito District, the parks, et cetera, and then TIF districts. So when the property was transformed from a older commercial property to a brand new but even unfinished residential, you'll notice the amount that was paid out to the county, the schools, and the city changed dramatically. So in the dark green, if you look at the size of the bars of the dark green before TIF, that dark green was, it was nice at the time. Just by rezoning it and starting and approving the project, getting it changed to multifamily, the amount to the school district doubled. And then when they actually started building it and the fiscal disparities went away, it doubled or tripled again. So, I mean, that's something that's kind of hidden, but that's how the numbers actually shake out.
Can you go back? So I do like this, but I get confused still on this. And so you've got TIF on here. So I assume TIF would show up in a 2025 bar?
Yeah, TIF will show up in future years.
Yeah, in future years, yep. Okay, and so then that makes sense. And then we talked about in the TIF district, so now I'm thinking I would see what I was hoping to see in future years. That's not what you're showing here. Because we've said that with a TIF district, the percentage of funds that go to a school district or to the general fund or what have you is all different. And so I was thinking I was seeing that, but I don't think I am. I think I would see that in future.
For this document, we look backwards. We look
Yeah.
at actual performance on the ground rather than future performance in 25 years.
Okay. And so then for 2024, that green bar, that because of this project, additional funding did go to the school district because of this project.
A tremendous amount of additional funding.
And
yes.
then in future years, those dollars go to the TIF district. Well, maybe not specifically.
We'll see how that
but-
plays out. I haven't done this before, so
Yeah.
the first couple of years it bobbles up and down.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's going to exactly happen next year, but I've got another example that looks
Okay.
at history that might inform us a little bit more.
But I do like what you're trying to do here.
I just we've talked about transparency and impact to the various taxing entities. In this case, with TIF and redevelopment, the impact of those taxing agencies is tremendously positive.
So stay there for just a second to finish that thought on the school district, because what I recall from Eller saying is that because the school districts is on a per pupil formula, they're either getting the money locally, they're getting money from the state, but they're going to get that per pupil amount. So what I see happening here, tells me that they're going to get, in 2024, they got a little bit more from local tax than they would have gotten from the state, but it doesn't affect their per pupil allocation. That's fixed,
I believe so.
except for levies, which will continue on.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So another project that was finished in 2024 was the first Bank and Trust over in Pentagon Village. That building right on the corner of 77th and Computer Avenue was finished. So happy to see that wrapped up. This site we've talked about a lot over the years. Lot 2 and Lot 5 are still pending, unfinished, vacant. We don't like that. The developer doesn't like that. They're still working on it. So they're still out in the market. But also fast forwarding to one of our updates at the end of today, the hotel site is still mired in a lawsuit. And so that project should have been finished. And it hasn't even started. And at this point, there is no start date for that one. So the owner recently listed that site for sale. And we'll see if they sell it or are they just testing the waters. But this is also a good example of why we use TIF notes rather than putting our money, the city's money, into the deal. At this point, this district is underperforming based on where we thought it was going to be. And that's really unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the city's aspirations. It's unfortunate to the developer's pocketbook, not to ours. So we're still making payments on the TIF notes based on the revenue that they do generate, but the revenue that they're generating is much, much lower than they were expecting. And so we'll live up to our end of the deal, but the way we structure those deals, how Dorsey writes them for us, is we're only obligated to reimburse them for what they create. They wanted to create 10 times more than they did. They haven't, but that's not our problem. That's not our risk. So it's a good example of why we have those protections in our TIF contracts. But do look forward to more progress in the years ahead. We're happy to see the Eddy finished, all the retail's well leased, the bank's doing well. More to come on that one. Stephanie also put some slides together about affordable housing and how many units we've actually delivered. In the report, there's also a slide of how many units we've, as a city council, how many you've approved. Some of those haven't been built. But it's broken down to 10-year segments. The dark blue shows the time periods before we had a mandatory affordable policy. And we got some units built. The orange shows the number of units actually delivered after the policy was applied and became enforceable through that PUD process. So there's still more progress to come, but you can see the dramatic difference of how we can actually create affordable units when we have an enforceable housing policy through PUD. This year in the report, I also included a couple other slides. I'm going to just go through two of them. They kind of show the
Excuse
same
me, Bill.
thing.
Commissioner
Yes.
Risser has a question.
Could you go back to that last slide? Okay. At our December meeting on the consent agenda was the compliance report for affordable housing. And I'm wondering if maybe at our next meeting, we can revisit that, because it appears that only the Aurora and Nolan Mains are compliant. But that was from that meeting, and it's possible other sites have been brought up to compliancy, but it'd be good to have a report on that. Thank you.
Sure. We can provide an update. Happy to do that.
Thank you.
I also pulled some other data. Some of it's historic and some of it's recent, but I just wanted to get it out there to kind of drive home the long-term view when we use tax increment financing. It's not a 1 or 2 year solution and you're done. It's 25 years typically. So in Centennial Lakes, which we talked about, the Richfield School District, all of Centennial Lakes, the housing, the office, the retail, the park, that's all in the Richfield School District. So from 1988 to 2013, when that district was decertified, that tax base grew by 1,560%. Plus we got the park, the shops, the doctor's offices, and everything else. So that's strategically when Edina tends to use TIF for these large redevelopment sites, is to make that dramatic leap forward from us. When that project was first started, the tax base was just over $250,000. When the TIF district ended, the tax capacity was $3.6 million, and that was 10 years ago. So it's only increased since then. I just wanted to put that out there. Similar story in the Grandview number 1 district, which was the condominiums, the office buildings, that type of thing. I also included data on, it's in the report, on the Lorient's performance. So similar, this project has just recently finished, but the tax base of the Lorient at 44th and France grew by over 900% in the last 4 years. The line chart on the upper left shows two things. The dark blue is the trajectory and the actual original capacity. So you talk about TIF, the incremental. So the dark red line on the top, that's the increment. So at the direction it was going, the original capacity would have stayed about the same, but you see that it's leaped forward quite a bit. We see the same thing at 50th in France with the Nolan Mains project. That project has grown by a factor of 15 times from the time it was started to today, or actually to last year. And then I dove into the Nolan Mains a little bit more. So if you recall, those properties were tax exempt for about 40 some years. So for that time period, they paid nothing to the city, the schools, the county, et cetera. When we approved the rezoning of that project, approved the use of TIF to build the parking ramps and the plazas, the value of that property has gone upwards. That's in the graph on the upper left-hand side of the screen. And then I also looked into where the tax dollars go, similar to what I showed earlier. So for the last couple of years, 2017, 2018, there was no tax revenue. It was all tax exempt. So when we sold it and actually put it in private ownership, it started to pay a meager amount of taxes to the city, school, et cetera. And then as we built the project, you'll notice that the amount of taxes increased dramatically. So over a 7-year period, it went from paying 0 to right now their tax bill is over $1.2 million a year because we use TIF to redevelop that property and get it back to productive use. Now today, that's an active TIF district. So this bar chart shows that the topmost bar, it's kind of a black on my screen, that's the money that's being collected in the TIF district. So that's what's being used to repay the debt, to build the parking garages and all those infrastructure items. The brighter colors on the bottom of the chart are what's being retained by the city, schools, county, and the state. When the TIF district expires, when all of our debt obligations are paid off, that whole value, the 1.2 million, will get redistributed, and that's when the city, school, and county really see that big jump. So we're not there yet, but that's what we can expect. But with this one, even looking at the short term, I blew up what the local agencies get. The dark blue, or I'm sorry, the dark green color on the bottom, that's the Edina School District. So they went from, just like everyone else, they went from receiving nothing in 2017. We put the property on the tax rolls in 2019 and got a little bit. And then the TIF district started being active. And they, built the property. So the dollar amount to the schools doubled and tripled over the years, even with the use of TIF. So again, we talk about the impact of the schools. The impact of the schools is they've collected more from this site than they ever had for 40-some years. And when the TIF debts are paid off, those TIF notes and other debt obligations are paid off, those numbers will increase dramatically. We have to be patient for that big burst, but those are the real-world numbers that we're seeing for two of these projects. So I'll leave it at that. I know we want to wrap up, but that information will be on the website. It's in the year in review report. And it's interesting to watch these districts actually evolve. So moving forward, we'll be collecting that data on a more timely basis. So expect these kind of charts in the future reports as well. With that, happy to answer any other questions or wrap it up.
Did you have other updates you wanted to give on 7250 France and anything else on Pentagon Village?
Yeah, I hit Pentagon Village. The only update on 7250 France is good news. So after a couple years, on a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of stress, they closed on their financing for that office building. So they closed on December 31st, probably a few minutes before the banks closed on December 31st, but they have their loan, they have their equity, so expect to see construction on that site in the next couple weeks, couple months. They'll first have to mobilize. If you recall, they left part of the foundation in place so that the road didn't collapse. So the first steps on that site will be to install temporary shoring so that the road remains stable. Then they'll come in and finish removing the foundations. Then they start building the new. So look forward to a groundbreaking sometime in the spring, hopefully on a nice warm day. But in the meantime, there'll be some work out there in the next few months getting the site ready and getting it moving forward. But that's a great news piece. I wanted to bring it forward. These projects aren't easy. Even when we pledge TIF, even when we rezone it, the developer has worked for a couple years to get that financing secured. And so their efforts have paid off, and we'll all benefit from that when it's finished.
And have they got their building permit?
I don't know if they've picked it up. I know it's ready.
It's ready. They haven't.
Okay. Well, it's ready. It's been authorized for issuance. They just need to pick it up. Okay.
And
All right.
pay us. Right?
Pay it.
And pay us, yes.
Sometimes that's a bigger
Commissioner Jackson has a question.
issue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One other question related to the end of the year in review report. At the end, you've got other HRA-related programs on page 26 and going forward. Are those funded through TIF funds, or can you briefly tell me where the funds for these programs come from? I'm sorry, I thought of this morning. I didn't have a chance to prep for it.
Sure. The Spark funds are monies that are already collected. So those originally were TIF increment dollars that were collected. So they're sitting in an investment bank account right now, just waiting. The other revenue, the HRA has a small tax levy that we use for various efforts. And then with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Stephanie can remind us how that is funded.
A lot of the housing projects, the rehab loan program and others are funded through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and those are the buy-in funds. And the last buy-in infusion we received was when the FRED got their permit. So those funds are diminishing. And then the Comcast program was funded with ARPA.
Okay, so I just want to people have been complaining about the use of TIF dollars, pooled TIF dollars is opaque. And so these programs, it looks like there are 9 of them, funded from these various sources, from Spark, from our levy, and from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so, and that's from the buy-in program, that's funded through that. So I just want to be transparent about when we pool TIF dollars, what happens to it. And it looks like primarily that's in the Spark Fund at this point, which has a limited time before it gets redistributed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Did you have anything you wanted to cover for 2025? Or do you feel it was
Yeah,
part of
no,
your?
I think we've got it covered.
All right,
yeah.
okay, good.
We'll still
Thank
be
you for
working
that.
hard in
We're
25.
right at the magic hour here, so just wanted to make sure that you had covered everything you wanted to cover. All right, do we have anything for the good of the order? Mr. Executive Director, any comments?
The only thing I'll mention is that we did ask in today's agenda packet, if you have ideas of subject matter you'd like to cover at HRA in 2025, we gave you a couple of examples that we think you want to hear, but if there are others, just let us know, and we're always working on our advanced calendar, and we can get those ready.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any HRA commissioners have comments this morning for the good of the order? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves and Commissioner Pierce seconds the adjournment of the HRA meeting for the City of Edina this Thursday, January 16, 2024 at 9:03 a.m. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned.